AMT's American LaFrance fire truck kits provide leaf springs at all four corners, as shown on the instruction sheets here. And these parts are decent representations of their full-size counterparts. We're looking at one of the front springs here. Compare that with a photo of a real American LaFrance under construction. And this is one of the rear springs. And the real thing for reference, again a photo taken at the American LaFrance plant of a different engine under construction. Both photos were taken from this book, and although they do show an earlier 700 series American LaFrance, compared to the 900 that I'm building with this project, the leaf spring details are representative. The main compromise on the kit springs is the simplified representation of the spring pack clamps and the U-bolts, which are highlighted in red here. With a little bit of simple scratch building, these can be replaced with much more realistic parts to enhance the appearance of your finished model. Removal of the molded-on detail is done with a chisel-style hobby knife blade, modified as shown in the top blade pictured by rounding the corners slightly to minimize the chance of accidentally gouging areas that you want to preserve the detail on. Shave off the raised areas representing spring pack clamps and U-bolts while preserving the molded-in spring leaf texture. File remaining molded-on detail off the top and bottom surfaces of the spring, creating a clean starting point from which we can now start adding our own scratch build details. It isn't necessary to restore the spring pack texture because areas like this, where the molded-on detail was removed, will be hidden once the new parts are added, and in fact are useful as a locating guide when we add the new parts. Begin with the bottom pieces of each spring pack clamp using 015 by 040 styrene strip cut slightly over length and glued in place with extra projecting out each side. The 032 diameter hole drilled here is optional. It's something I like to do so I can use a brass wire pin for added strength securing the axle to the spring pack assembly. Now add pieces of 015 by 040 styrene strip on both sides of the spring pack, representing the vertical portions of the leaf spring clamps. As you can see here, the evidence of the molded-on detail is now hidden behind the new parts. Trim excess material off the bottom pieces of each spring pack clamp. A nice flush cut can be done using the track cutting pliers, leaving a minimal amount of material requiring filing for final cleanup. Consistent length on all of the vertical pieces is easily achieved by using an appropriately sized piece of styrene strip as a depth gauge. For this application, 30 thou thick by 125 wide styrene strip was a perfect fit, and it's shown clamped in here using the high-tech expedient of a clothespin. Rough cut and file each of the projecting pieces to the proper length. Remove the styrene strip, and the end result is visible here, with all the vertical pieces consistent same length. On the bottom side of the spring, round the corners slightly where the vertical styrene strips join up with the horizontal ones. This creates the illusion of the spring pack clamp being one single piece of bent flat bar rather than three separate styrene strips glued in place. Now cut short sections of 20 thou styrene rod to the appropriate length and glue them in place between each of the vertical pairs of uprights. These represent the bolts going through, holding the spring pack clamp together. To complete the illusion of the spring pack clamp being bolted together, add a small nut and bolt casting to each of the vertical pieces, aligning it by eye with the styrene rod. This completes the installation of the spring pack clamps. Here is the complete set of springs from the ladder chief kit, with all of the spring pack clamps installed. Instead of gluing the springs to the frame at this stage, I'm going to create a subassembly out of the pair of springs in the axle. The first step in doing this is to trim off the mounting pins as short as possible. By doing this, the pin can still be used to locate the spring positively on the frame, and with everything held in place with masking tape, I can glue the subassembly together, but still remove parts easily once the glue has set. The axle is now glued in place, and I can easily remove the masking tape and spread the springs apart slightly to slip them off the frame. If the pins were left full length, there'd be a lot more bending and flexing required, running the risk of damaging the spring. With the front axle and spring subassembly removed from the frame, I'm drilling through the hole in the spring down into the axle for installation of the brass wire mounting pin. 032 wire is cut to the appropriate length and started into the hole and pushed down so it's flush with the top of the spring so it won't interfere with added details later when we install the U-bolts and mounting hardware. I can also see here that the camera never lies because this piece of styrene rod, as well as this one, look like they were aligned perfectly by eye, but the camera points out they're not aligned too well. They're going to have to come off and be reinstalled. And I can also see how one of the bolt head castings has gotten knocked off inadvertently here, so that's an easy matter of gluing a new one in place. The same approach is used to create a subassembly with the rear axle, with the springs taped in place temporarily, axle glued in place, and subassembly removed for the installation of mounting pins. Adding these pins is an optional step, which isn't necessary for a strictly display model, but one that I like to do for the added strength it provides when the model is moved any distance, whether I'm going to a show, taking it outside for photos, or any other reason that the model might receive some handling. That concludes this installment. I'll cover the installation of U-bolts and mounting hardware, securing spring pack to axle, in a separate piece at a later date. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Spring pack clamps are a detail that's not feasible to mold as part of the kit part due to limitations of the injection molding process, but it's an easy detail upgrade you can do with some simple items like styrene strip, styrene rod, and bolt head castings.